Strange shadows in the junkyard. The junkyard was always silent at night. Old cars stood like sleeping giants, their broken windows shining faintly under the moonlight. Rusted machines, piles of metal, and twisted wires created a maze where shadows danced every time the wind blew. To anyone else, this place was dead, but to him it was home. He was a simple man. Every evening after finishing his small day jobs, he walked to the junkyard. He worked there alone, repairing small parts, searching for anything useful, and selling metal for survival. It was not an easy life, but he had accepted it. The junkyard was his world, but one night something changed. As he locked the gate, he felt something unusual. The hairs on his neck stood up, and for the first time in years, he felt he was not alone. The sound of footsteps echoed faintly between the heaps of metal. He stopped and listened carefully. Silence. Only the wind brushed past broken car doors. He shook his head, telling himself it was his imagination. Yet when he turned to leave, he caught sight of something. A flicker of movement behind an old bus frame. A shadow, thin and quick, slipping away before his eyes could focus. His heart beat faster. He was a man used to silence, and this was different. "Who's there?" He called out, his voice strong but uncertain. No answer. He walked slowly toward the place where the shadow had moved. The crunch of gravel under his shoes sounded louder than usual. Every step felt heavy, as if the junkyard itself was warning him. Behind the bus there was nothing. Just broken seats, rusty bolts, and the smell of old oil. Still, he could not shake off the feeling. Someone was here, watching, waiting. That night he went home with unease in his chest. But when morning came, he told himself it was nothing. Probably stray dogs, maybe a thief. The junkyard was large after all, but the next night it happened again. This time he heard soft breathing. Not human. Not animal. Something different. Low, almost hidden, but clear enough for his ears. He stood still, his eyes searching the dark corners. His lamplight flickered across broken glass, rusty doors, and piles of scrap metal. For a moment he saw two small eyes reflecting the light, bright, glowing, and afraid. When he blinked, they were gone. The man felt a strange pull in his chest. Fear, yes, but also curiosity. What kind of creature hides in a junkyard? Why here? Why now? Night after night the shadows returned. Sometimes behind old tires, sometimes near the broken crane, sometimes between heaps of iron. Always close but never clear. The man began to notice small signs. A piece of bread missing from his table, a water bottle slightly moved, soft footprints near the metal piles. It was no thief. Thieves take and run, but whoever this was, they were hiding. Living here, and so the junkyard was no longer silent. It had become alive. Every creak of metal, every shifting shadow, every gust of wind carried a question. Who was out there? Friend or enemy? Human? Or something else? He felt it deep inside. His life was about to change, because in the heart of the junkyard, among broken cars and forgotten machines, something, or someone, was waiting for him. Watching him. Depending on him, and he was about to find out. The first encounter. The next evening, the man returned to the junkyard with a heavy mind. All day he had thought about those glowing eyes. He had tried to convince himself it was a dream, or maybe the reflection of a cat. But deep down he knew better. Those eyes had looked back at him with fear, and with something more, something alive. He carried his small lamp as he walked between the piles of scrap. The night was cold and the wind sang through broken pipes like a strange flute. Every step echoed as if the junkyard itself was listening. He reached the old bus where he had first seen the shadow. His heart was calm, but his hands trembled. Slowly, he placed a small piece of bread on a rusted chair and stepped back. Then he waited. Minutes passed. Nothing moved. The silence pressed hard, making the ticking of his watch louder than ever. Just as he was about to give up, a faint sound reached his ears. A soft shuffle. The bread was gone, his eyes widened. He had not seen it happen. Only the empty chair remained. Something fast, something cautious had taken it. The man decided not to chase. Instead, he returned the next night with more food. A bottle of water, an apple, a little rice wrapped in paper. He placed it on the same chair and sat in the shadows, pretending to work with tools. This time he saw them. From behind the broken bus door, two small figures appeared. His breath caught in his throat. One was tall but thin, her body weak and covered with strange marks on her skin. The other was much smaller, a child no more than 8 in human years with wide, glowing eyes that looked around nervously. They were not human. Their skin had a faint silver-blue tone glowing softly under the moonlight. Their hands were long, their fingers delicate, almost fragile. The mother bent down, carefully taking the food with shaking hands while the child hid behind her legs, peeking out at the man. He did not move. He did not speak. He only watched in silence as they ate quickly like starving animals. The crunch of bread and the sound of water swallowing filled the night. When they were done, the mother turned her eyes toward him. They were filled with fear, but also with something he understood. Gratitude. She gave a small nod, hesitant but real. Then, holding the child close, she vanished again into the darkness of the junkyard. The man sat frozen. His heart pounded, his skin cold, but inside him burned a strange warmth. He had seen something no one else would believe. A mother and her child, not from this world. He returned home that night without locking the gate. He wanted them to come back. He wanted them safe. The days that followed turned into a quiet ritual. Every evening he left food on the same chair, and every evening the mother and daughter came. At first they only took the food when he was far away, but soon they began to appear while he was still sitting in the shadows. The child grew less afraid. One night she even looked directly at him, her glowing eyes wide with curiosity instead of fear. For a second her lips curved into the smallest smile. It was enough to shake the man's heart. He did not know who they were. He did not know why they were hiding here in his junkyard. But one thing became clear. They were not dangerous. They were desperate. They were surviving. And for the first time in many years, the man felt something new inside his lonely world. A purpose. Because now it was not just a junkyard. It had become a refuge. A place where strangers met in silence. A place where trust was slowly born between worlds, and he knew this was only the beginning. Silent routine, the junkyard no longer felt empty. For years it had been a graveyard of broken machines filled only with silence and rust, but now it carried the quiet rhythm of something alive. Each evening the man returned, and each evening they were there, the alien mother and her daughter waiting in the shadows. They never spoke. Not a single word passed between them. Instead, their world was built on small actions. A piece of bread placed on a chair, a bottle of water left near the old bus, a soft nod of thanks, and always silence. The man grew used to this routine. He would arrive at dusk, set down the food, and sit on a nearby pile of scrap. He did not stare at them directly. He let them feel invisible, as if he were simply working, pretending not to notice. Yet inside, every part of him was awake, alert, curious. The mother remained cautious. She moved carefully like a shadow, her body always blocking the little one. But the child was different. She was curious. Her glowing eyes followed the man, watching the way he handled tools, the way he sat quietly, the way he placed food without asking for anything in return. One evening, the child did something unexpected. Instead of hiding behind her mother, she stepped forward. The man froze. His breath caught, but he forced himself to stay calm. She reached out her small hand and touched the bottle of water. Then for the first time she glanced at him directly, her glowing eyes wide, unblinking. The moment lasted only a few seconds, but to the man, it felt endless. Something invisible passed between them. Not words, not sound, just trust. The next night she did it again. And again. Slowly, the distance between them shrank. The mother still stayed back, weak and protective, but she no longer pulled the child away. She seemed to understand. The man, too, began to change. His routine was no longer just work. He planned what food to bring, sometimes saving the best pieces for them. He repaired an old kettle so he could leave warm tea on cold nights. He even found a blanket in the junkyard and folded it neatly by the bus, pretending it was nothing. And each time, the child's eyes lit up brighter. But the junkyard itself carried tension. Every creak of metal, every echo of footsteps reminded the man that danger was near. He began to notice strange signs, footprints that did not belong to him, marks on the ground, and once the faint hum of machines far away. Something or someone was searching. The mother felt it too. She looked up at the sky often, her face filled with worry, her arms holding the child tightly. The man could not understand her language, but he could read her fear. She was hiding not just from hunger but from pursuit. Yet even with danger pressing close, their silent bond grew. The child no longer feared him. She began to mimic his actions, pretending to fix broken bolts, copying the way he sat cross-legged, even humming softly when he worked. The sound was strange, not human, but soft and sweet. For the first time in years, the man smiled. Not out of habit, but from his heart. This was their silent routine. He brought food. She brought trust. The mother brought quiet hope. And the junkyard, once forgotten, became a secret place of connection. But deep inside, the man knew this routine could not last forever. Shadows were growing longer. Strange lights in the distance flickered more often. And sooner or later, silence would be broken, because when worlds collide, silence is never enough. Signs of danger. The silent routine was becoming almost normal. Each evening, the man placed food the mother accepted with caution, and the child watched him with growing trust. For a time, it felt safe. But safety is fragile, and in the junkyard, danger was never far away. It started with the sky. One night, while he sat on a pile of tires, he noticed a glow beyond the horizon. Not the usual city lights. This glow moved, slow, steady, unnatural. It flickered in colors no human aircraft carried. Blue, red, then silver, white. His heart sank. Something was searching the skies. The mother noticed too. She lifted her face toward the light, her expression tense. Her hands tightened around her daughter. The child tried to look curious, but the mother pulled her close, hiding her glowing eyes under a blanket of shadows. The man said nothing. He had no words for this, but he understood. Someone, or something, was hunting. Days passed, and the signs grew stronger. Strange hums in the distance, like engines too advanced to belong to trucks or planes. The junkyard metal sometimes rattled at night, though there was no wind. Once he even found scorch marks on the far edge of the field, as if something had landed or burned there recently. The mother became restless. She moved quickly, never staying in the same corner of the junkyard. Some nights she refused the food, pulling the child deeper into the piles of scrap. Her eyes constantly scanned the sky. Fear lived in her every movement. The man wanted to help, but how could he? He was only human, with nothing but his hands, his tools, and his quiet loyalty. Still, he made small efforts. He shifted heavy cars to create barriers, building hidden paths between the piles. He dug out a hollow space beneath a mountain of scrap metal, large enough for two small bodies to hide. He never told them, but the mother noticed. And though she remained silent, her eyes softened for a moment. Then came the night of the signal. It was late, the air colder than usual. The man sat near the bus, pretending to work, when a piercing sound cut through the sky, high-pitched, metallic, almost like a scream. He looked up and froze. Above, 3 lights moved in perfect formation. Not planes. Not helicopters. Their movements were too sharp, too precise. They stopped mid-air, hovering silently before scattering in different directions. The junkyard metal shook. The child whimpered softly, clutching her mother. The man's chest tightened. He wanted to run, to hide, but his feet stayed rooted. His eyes followed the lights until they vanished beyond the horizon. Silence returned, but it was not the same silence. It was heavy, dangerous. That night, the mother did not eat. She sat with her child in her arms, staring at the sky, rocking back and forth. Her glowing eyes were filled with a pain the man could not understand, but he could feel it. He knew someone was hunting them, and soon the hunt would come closer. The man lay awake long after leaving the junkyard. His small house felt colder, emptier. For the first time, he realized the depth of his choice. He could walk away, pretend none of this was happening. Or he could stay. He could protect them. By morning, his decision was made. He was only human. But sometimes being human meant standing between danger and the ones who could not fight. From that day, the junkyard was no longer just a place of shadows and silence. It had become a battlefield waiting to happen, and he knew the hunters were coming. The bond grows the nights after the strange lights in the sky were heavy with fear. The mother kept the child close, her glowing eyes filled with worry, and the man stayed alert, always listening for the hum of unseen machines. But even inside this tension, something unexpected began to grow. A bond. It started with small gestures. The man, knowing their fear, began to leave food in places that felt safer. Hidden corners, sheltered spots under broken roofs. He repaired an old lantern and placed it where the mother sat, so she would not be cold in the dark. He even dragged an old car door to cover the hollow space he had dug, turning it into a secret shelter. The mother noticed everything. She never said a word, but her eyes began to change. No longer only sharp with suspicion, they now held traces of quiet trust. The child, however, showed her feelings more freely. She no longer hid behind her mother every time the man appeared. Instead, she began to copy him. When he bent over to fix a broken engine part, she squatted nearby, pretending to twist invisible bolts with her long fingers. When he carried water, she carried a small empty can, giggling softly as if it were a game. The man never laughed loudly. He was a quiet soul. But inside, her little games lit a forgotten corner of his heart. A warmth he had not felt in many years stirred inside him. One night, while he sat on a pile of scrap metal polishing an old wrench, the child came closer than ever before. She walked slowly, her glowing eyes watching him carefully. The mother tensed, ready to pull her back, but then she froze. She saw what her daughter was about to do. The child reached out her hand and touched the man's tool. Her small silver-blue fingers brushed against his rough human skin for just a second. The man's chest tightened. He didn't move, afraid of breaking the fragile moment. Then, to his surprise, the child placed a small stone in his palm. It was smooth, round, and glowing faintly in the dark. A gift. He looked at the stone, then at her. For the first time, he let a soft smile appear on his lips. He nodded once, silently thanking her. The child's glowing eyes brightened, and she ran back to her mother, excited. The mother's expression softened. For a long moment, she and the man looked at each other across the distance of silence. No words were spoken, but the meaning was clear. She trusted him with her child. From then on, their bond deepened. The child began to greet him with small waves of her hand. She imitated his whistle when he worked, though her voice came out strange and musical, like a melody from another world. He even began to leave little surprises for her. An old toy car, a shiny button, a broken watch that still ticked faintly. Each time her face glowed with joy. The man's lonely world, once filled only with rust and silence, now carried laughter. Soft, alien laughter, but the bond was not only with the child. Slowly, the mother herself began to step closer. One evening, she nodded at him in a way that felt different. Not just gratitude, but recognition. She understood that this human was not a threat. He was becoming something more, and the man who had lived so long without family felt it too. Every evening when he walked toward the junkyard, his steps were lighter. He was no longer walking into silence. He was walking toward them. Still, in the far distance, danger remained. Strange lights flickered on the horizon, and the hum of machines sometimes echoed in the night air. The hunters were still out there. But in this small corner of the world, among broken cars and forgotten machines, something stronger than fear was growing. Trust, connection, a bond, and bonds, once formed, are hard to break. The secret revealed, the nights had grown colder, but the man no longer felt the chill. Each evening he carried food to the junkyard, and each evening the mother and child appeared from the shadows. Their bond was silent but strong now. The child trusted him fully, and even the mother no longer looked at him with suspicion. Yet behind her tired eyes, he could still see fear. A fear that never left her. One evening, the man noticed her skin glowing faintly in patterns like shifting lines of light. It was not just color, it was communication. He watched carefully as she touched her daughter's arm, drawing glowing lines with her long fingers. The child nodded, as if understanding words without sound. The man sat quietly, pretending to work on a broken pipe, but inside, questions burned. Who were they? Where had they come from? Why were they hiding here in the middle of rust and silence? That night, something changed. The mother, weak and tired, tried to rise from the ground but stumbled. The man rushed forward instinctively, catching her before she fell. For a moment, their faces were close. Her glowing eyes locked onto his, and he felt the weight of her world pressing into his chest. She did not pull away. Instead, she raised her hand slowly and touched his forehead. And then, he saw, not with his eyes but with his mind. Images flashed before him, worlds burning under fire, ships exploding in the sky, and soldiers in black armor marching across alien lands. He saw the mother carrying her child through flames, running through broken cities chased by shadows that moved like machines, but killed like monsters. He felt her fear, her desperation, her endless search for safety. Then he saw Earth, blue, quiet, untouched by those hunters. She had fled here to hide, to survive. The vision ended as quickly as it began. The man stumbled back, gasping for air. His hands shook, his heart pounded, but now he understood. They were refugees. survivors from a war far greater than anything humans could imagine. The mother looked at him, her glowing eyes full of sorrow. She touched her chest, then touched the child's head and finally pointed to the sky. Her lips parted, whispering in a broken, trembling voice, "Run from them." Her voice was strange, heavy with an accent not of this world, but the meaning was clear. The man felt the truth settle inside him like a heavy stone. The shadows that had haunted the junkyard, the strange lights in the sky, the humming machines at night, these were not accidents. They were hunters, and they were searching for her, for them. The child looked up at him then, holding the glowing stone she had once given him. She placed it in his hand again, pressing it firmly into his palm. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, spoke without words. "Protect us." The man closed his fingers around the stone. His throat tightened. He was only human, a simple man who worked in rust and silence. But in this moment he understood something greater. These two lives, this mother and daughter, were now bound to his. He could not walk away. That night he did not sleep. He sat in his small house, staring at the glowing stone, feeling its faint pulse against his skin. It was not just light, it was alive, carrying warmth, carrying trust. The secret was revealed. They were not strangers anymore. They were family in the making, and the man knew that soon the hunters would come closer. When that time came, he would have to choose, not only for them, but for himself, because protecting them no longer felt like duty. It felt like destiny. The chase, the junkyard, had always been a place of silence, but that night silence was broken. It began with a hum, low at first, then louder, until the very ground seemed to vibrate. The man froze where he stood, his eyes snapping to the sky. Lights cut through the darkness, sharp beams sweeping across the field. They moved like hunters, scanning, searching. The mother clutched her daughter tightly, her glowing eyes wide with fear. The child whimpered softly, hiding her face in her mother's chest. The man felt his pulse hammering in his ears. He had seen this moment coming. The hunters had arrived. He acted quickly. Grabbing a rusted sheet of metal, he motioned for them to follow. The mother hesitated, fear locking her in place, but when the man pointed toward the hollow space he had built beneath the piles of scrap, she understood. With careful steps, she carried the child into the hidden shelter. He pulled the car door over the entrance, covering them in darkness. Then the beams of light struck the junkyard. 3 figures entered, tall, armored, and faceless. Their bodies glowed faintly with technology far beyond anything human. They moved with precision, their footsteps heavy against the gravel. Each carried a strange weapon, humming with deadly energy. The man's heart pounded, but he forced himself to stay calm. He picked up a wrench, pretending to work on an old engine, as if he were nothing more than a poor mechanic who belonged to the junkyard. The hunters spread out. One scanned the broken bus, another inspected the piles of cars, while the third walked straight toward him. The beam of its weapon landed on his chest. He swallowed hard. "Evening," he said softly, his voice steady despite the fear twisting inside him. The figure tilted its head as if analyzing him. A strange mechanical voice broke the silence. "Human? Alone?" The man nodded slowly. "Just me, scrapyard. Nothing more." The hunter's weapon hummed louder. It scanned the ground, moving its beam across the dirt. For a terrifying second, the light hovered near the hollow space where the mother and child hid. The man's stomach tightened. If they discovered it, all would be lost. Acting on instinct, he coughed loudly and kicked a toolbox, spilling bolts across the ground. The noise echoed sharply. The hunter's head snapped toward him. "Clumsy," the man muttered, forcing a nervous laugh. He bent down, gathering the bolts with trembling hands. Anything to keep their attention away from the hidden shelter. For long moments the hunter stared. Then, with a sharp motion, it turned away, signaling to the others. They regrouped at the center of the junkyard, speaking in a language the man could not understand. Their voices were harsh, mechanical, broken with static. Finally, they moved back toward the glowing lights in the sky. With a blinding flash, they lifted off, vanishing into the night. The silence returned. The man exhaled, his body shaking as if every muscle had been pulled tight. He rushed to the hollow, pulling away the cover. The mother and child emerged, their faces pale, their eyes wide with terror. The child clung to his leg, her small fingers gripping tightly. The mother looked at him, her glowing eyes filled with something new. Not just fear, but trust. A deep, unshakable trust. He had lied for them. He had risked himself, and he would do it again. The junkyard no longer felt safe. The hunters had found this place. Next time they would search deeper. Next time they would not leave so easily. The man knew what this meant. Their silent routine, their fragile bond, it had reached a new stage. They could not simply hide forever. The chase had begun, and now survival meant running faster than the hunters. Together. His sacrifice. The junkyard was no longer a place of safety. After the hunters had left, the silence did not feel calm anymore. It felt heavy, like the breath before a storm. The man knew they would come back, and next time they would not leave until they found what they were looking for. That night he could not sleep. He sat by the window of his small house, staring at the glowing stone the child had given him. Its faint light pulsed like a heartbeat. He thought of her small hands gripping his leg, her wide eyes filled with trust. He thought of the mother's silent gaze, heavy with sorrow but also with hope. He whispered to himself, "If I don't protect them, no one will." The next evening he returned to the junkyard earlier than usual. The mother and child were already waiting, their faces tense, their bodies restless. The mother pointed to the sky, her hand shaking. The man followed her gaze. The hunters were coming back. This time the machines in the sky were louder, closer. The beams of light cut across the field with fierce energy. The man's chest tightened, but he forced himself to stay calm. He knew what he had to do. He turned to the mother, pointing toward the hollow shelter. "Hide," he said firmly. His voice carried strength, even though fear burned inside him. The mother hesitated, clutching her daughter. Her glowing eyes pleaded with him, but the man shook his head. "Go," he whispered. "Protect her." Reluctantly, the mother obeyed. She crawled into the hidden shelter with her child, covering the entrance with trembling hands. The man took a deep breath and walked out into the open yard. Moments later, the hunters arrived. 3 figures descended from the sky, their weapons glowing, their armor reflecting cold light. They spread across the junkyard like wolves closing in on prey. The man stood tall among the piles of broken cars, his hands raised. "Looking for something?" He called out, his voice echoing through the night. The hunters froze. Their helmets turned toward him. One stepped forward, its voice sharp and mechanical. "You know." The man forced a laugh. "Know what? This is a junkyard. All you'll find here is rust." The hunter raised its weapon. A beam of red light cut across the ground, missing his feet by inches. "Where?" the voice demanded. The man's heart raced, but he stood firm. "I don't know what you're talking about." The hunters spread out, scanning the piles. The man realized he had only one chance, to distract them long enough for the mother and child to escape if discovered. He grabbed a wrench from the ground and hurled it at an old car. The loud crash echoed like thunder, pulling all 3 hunters toward the noise. "Over here," he shouted, running across the yard, deliberately making himself the target. Energy beams struck around him, lighting up the night with violent sparks. He stumbled, fell, but got up again, his body fueled by nothing but determination. The hunters gave chase, their weapons firing, tearing through piles of metal. The junkyard became a storm of sparks, smoke, and crashing steel. The man ducked behind an old crane, his chest heaving, his hands shaking. He knew he couldn't outrun them forever, but he didn't need to. He just needed to buy time. One hunter cornered him, weapon raised. The man stared straight into the faceless mask. His body was weak, but his voice was strong. "You'll never find them." The weapon hummed, glowing brighter. The man braced himself, his heart pounding. He was ready to sacrifice everything. But before the beam could fire, a sound pierced the air. The child's voice, high and strange, calling out from the shadows. The hunters turned sharply, distracted. In that instant, the man grabbed a heavy iron bar and swung with all his strength. Sparks flew as it struck the hunter's weapon, sending it crashing to the ground. The fight had begun, and the man knew. Even if it cost his life, he would protect them. The new family. The junkyard was silent again, but it was not the same silence. The smell of burnt metal lingered in the air, and broken piles of scrap still glowed faintly from the energy blasts of the hunters. The man stood there, his chest rising and falling heavily, his clothes torn, his hands bruised. He was alive, but only barely. From the shadows, the mother and child emerged. The child ran first, her glowing eyes wide with fear and relief. She threw her arms around his leg, clinging tightly. He felt the small weight of her trust, and despite his pain he managed a weak smile. The mother followed slower, her body trembling, but her eyes filled with something different now. Not only gratitude, not only relief, something stronger, something deeper. She reached out and placed her hand on his shoulder. For a long moment she held it there, her glowing fingers warm against his skin. Her lips parted, and in her broken, heavy voice she whispered one word. Family. The man froze. The word echoed inside him, cutting through the exhaustion, the pain, the fear. Family. It was something he had lost long ago, something he had never thought he would find again. And yet, here it was, offered to him by an alien mother and her child. He looked at the little girl still clinging to him, and gently placed his rough hand on her silver blue hair. She looked up, her glowing eyes shining like small stars. For the first time he let himself laugh softly. From that night on, the junkyard changed. It was no longer just a place of broken machines and rust. It became a home. The man built small shelters from the scraps, one for warmth, one for sleeping, one for food. He cleared a space where the child could play safely, stacking old tires like walls to keep her from wandering too far. The mother began to help him. Though weak, she used her long, delicate fingers to fix small things, repairing wires, shaping metal into useful forms. She could not speak much of his language, but she learned quickly, repeating simple words he used. Food, water, safe. Each word, broken and heavy, carried a meaning far beyond its sound. The child, however, was the brightest light in those nights. She laughed often now, her strange alien voice ringing like music through the junkyard. She played with old tools, turned shiny bolts into toys, and often sat beside the man, copying the way he worked. Sometimes she placed small glowing stones in his pocket, gifts she collected from places he could not see. He kept every single one. The man's days were no longer empty. His steps toward the junkyard were no longer heavy. He had purpose. He had people, no, more than people. He had family. But even in this fragile peace, danger was not forgotten. The hunters had been forced away, but they were not gone. The mother's eyes still lifted to the sky, often filled with silent worry, and at night the man sometimes heard faint hums far away. The war they had escaped was not finished. Yet here, in this small corner of earth, they had found something stronger than fear. Connection, trust, a bond unbroken by silence or difference. One evening, as the three of them sat together around a small fire made from scrap wood, the child leaned against him, her head resting on his arm. The mother sat close, her glowing eyes reflecting the flames. For the first time in years, the man felt peace, and as he looked at them, this fragile, strange, and beautiful pair, he understood the truth. Family is not always by blood. Sometimes family is by choice, by sacrifice, by love. And in the heart of a forgotten junkyard, among rust and shadows, a new family had been born. Hopeful future, the junkyard had changed. Once it was only a graveyard of broken cars and forgotten machines. Now it had warmth. It had voices, laughter, and quiet moments of peace. The man no longer walked through the piles of rust alone. At his side, the child skipped lightly, her glowing eyes searching for shiny bolts and smooth stones. Behind them, the mother walked slowly, her tired steps steadying as her strength returned. Together they moved like a family, strange, silent, but whole. Each evening the man built small fires from scrap wood, and the three of them sat together. He cooked simple meals while the child hummed her strange little songs, her voice unlike anything human, yet beautiful. The mother sometimes reached out and touched his hand in silence, her eyes telling him what words could not. Gratitude, trust, belonging. The man had never thought he would feel this way again. For years his life had been nothing but loneliness, work, and silence. But now, when he looked at them, he felt something stronger than blood or duty. He felt love, the quiet kind, built not with words but with actions. Still, danger was never far. Some nights faint hums echoed in the sky. Strange lights appeared at the edges of the horizon. The hunters were still out there searching, but the man did not let fear rule him. He prepared. He built stronger shelters in the junkyard using heavy cars as walls. He dug secret paths beneath the piles of metal, tunnels only they knew. He turned broken machines into traps ready to spring if danger came again. The mother helped too. Her strange fingers bent wires into shapes he could not understand, creating small devices that hummed softly with energy. She placed them around their shelters, and the man noticed they glowed faintly whenever the hunter's lights appeared in the distance. Protection, warning, hope. The child, however, carried the brightest hope of all. She grew braver each day, her laughter filling the junkyard like sunlight. She called him with her broken words, simple sounds but filled with meaning. Sometimes she tugged his sleeve and whispered, "Home." Every time the man's throat tightened, he nodded and whispered back, "Yes, home." One evening, the sky lit with orange as the sun sank behind the horizon. The man sat on the hood of an old car, the child resting beside him, the mother close by. The world outside was uncertain, dangerous, and full of shadows. But in that moment, everything felt still. The child placed a small glowing stone in his hand, brighter than any before. She pressed his fingers around it and smiled. He looked at the stone, then at her, and felt the weight of what it meant. It was not just a gift. It was trust. It was love. It was family. The mother reached out, her glowing eyes reflecting the fading light. She touched her chest, then touched his arm and spoke softly. Her voice was broken, heavy but clear enough to understand. Not alone. The man's eyes burned. Though he did not cry, he nodded slowly, his voice rough but steady. Never again. As night fell, stars appeared in the sky, far away yet shining brightly. Somewhere out there, the hunters still searched. But here, in the forgotten heart of Earth, something stronger had been born. Not just survival. Not just hiding. But hope. The man had once fed strangers in silence. Now he was no longer just a man of rust and loneliness. He was a protector, a father, a part of something greater than himself. And in the junkyard, under the stars, a human, an alien mother and her child sat together. Not strangers. Not fugitives, a family.